So in today's workshop, we're going to look at chimp behaviour and managing your chimp. For those of you that have heard of Professor Stephen Peters, you'll understand what we're talking about and his model of the chimp paradox. For those of you that haven't heard of Steve Peters, hopefully by the end of this workshop, you'll understand a little bit more about it and what a huge impact this whole idea can have on your life. So what Stephen Peters did was he broke the brain down into 3 simple parts. So we're going to look at that today, but the whole aim is to keep this really simple and apply it directly to real life. If it catches your interest, you can find out more, you can read the book. We will share the links to the book at the end of this workshop. So there's a lot more information out there. But today we just want to give you the principles so you can understand a little bit more about how our brain works and why we sometimes behave in the way we behave. So to start with, I'd like to start by telling you a story. And I'd like to tell you about Georgia. Georgia came on a climbing out programme last year, having survived the Manchester Arena bombing. On the first night she was with climbing out, we went to go caving. And when we got to the cave, we were in the middle of the Peak District. Someone who was already down in the cave had left a bag outside the cave entrance because they hadn't wanted to carry it down into the cave with them. When Georgia saw the bag, she panicked. Last time she'd seen an unattended bag, a bomb had gone off. So she understandably got really upset. She went into panic mode. She wanted to run away. Now, I'm going to tell you what happened to Georgia in a moment, but first of all, I'd like to explain to you what we explained to her that night. So what Steve Peters explained was that the brain in its simplest form is broken down into 3 parts. The chimp, the human, and the computer. So today we're going to look at those 3 different parts of the brain and how they work and how they affect your behaviour. So to look first at the chimp. The chimp part of your brain goes back to when we were chimpanzees in the jungle. It's the oldest part of the brain. And it's all about survival. So if there was any threat to food, shelter, reproduction, ego or herd status, the chimp was going to react. It's back to the fight, flight or freeze response. Now, as time's evolved, sometimes those responses aren't relevant anymore, but it still drives a lot of our behaviour in modern day society. So the chimp brain is still primarily responsible for survival. Its main job is to keep us alive. But because of that, it's continually looking for any threats or any dangers, and that can make it paranoid. It means your chimp can sometimes jump to conclusions and become irrational and emotional. But your chimp is neither your friend nor your foe, because ultimately we want our chimp to keep us alive. So imagine that scenario when you slip off a ladder and you're hanging on, and from somewhere you find the strength to pull yourself back to safety. That's your chimp doing its job in giving you that fight to enable you to pull yourself to safety. Equally, that time when you go to have one biscuit and then you have another, and before you know it, half the packet's gone. That's also your chimp. Your chimp is hijacking the situation and kidding you that maybe this is the last food you're ever going to get, so you need to eat as much as you can. We know in reality that it's not our last meal, but this is where we can sometimes get irrational behaviour. So your chimp is neither good nor bad. He's just very good at doing his job, but sometimes that can work for us and sometimes that can work against us. The trick to all of this is to get a good relationship with your chimp and to learn how to manage it. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But let's look at the human part of the brain. The human part of the brain is your rational thinking. The human part of the brain looks for evidence and assesses the evidence before coming to a logical decision. The trouble with this is it takes time. It takes time to process the information and come to a decision. And so the chimp is actually 5 times faster than the human part of your brain, which means in some situations your chimp can hijack situations and prevent us from thinking logically and rationally. And then finally we come to the computer. So the computer is like a computer you buy in the shop. When you first get it, when you're first born, it's got an empty hard drive. There's nothing written on it. But over time, your computer stores all your experiences, all the experiences you've had in your past, and all your learned behaviours. And it then becomes a point of reference for both the chimp and the human. So they will always look to the computer to see if there are any learned behaviours or any past experiences that can help them to make a decision. Now, the computer has to work really fast for that to happen, because sometimes the chimp wants a really quick response, because if he thinks you're in danger, they want to react immediately. So the computer's actually 20 times faster than your chimp. And this means it can sometimes create automatic responses, which means it will automatically create a reaction, a behaviour that sometimes isn't appropriate or needed for that situation. So the way the process works in your brain is that your chimp will always get first bite of the cherry. So in any situation, your chimp will first go back to the computer and say, is there any danger? Has this been a threat in the past? If the answer is yes, he's going to kick off and react. If the answer is no, your chimp will then settle down, go back in his cage and calm down, and hand it over to the human part of your brain to think logically and rationally and make a rational decision. So if I take you back to Georgia and what was happening that night, she's outside the cave. She sees an unattended bag. Her chimp looks into her computer, and there's evidence in there of a past experience when an unattended bag was bad news, when an unattended bag meant that there was a threat. So he reacts. He tells her to get out of there as fast as you can. He says to panic, to run, to try and escape. Now, once we'd explained to Georgia about the chimp paradox and how your brain works, what she realised was that it wasn't that she wasn't coping. It wasn't that she was falling apart and having a breakdown after the bombing. Her brain was just reacting normally. Her chimp was doing a great job of keeping her safe. But in that situation, the behaviour wasn't needed. So once she learned about how the brain worked, she was then able to press the pause button on her chimp, reassure her chimp that everything was fine. She'd been told that that bag had been left by someone who was already down the cave and that there was no danger. Because she was able to reassure her chimp would then settle back down. And she could get the rational, logical evidence that everything was safe and she was fine to go down the cave. Now, not only did Georgia get down that cave and have a fantastic evening, but that changed the rest of Georgia's life, because she was then able to manage her chimp moving forwards and realised that he was doing a great job of keeping her safe and her brain was just reacting normally. And she learned how to manage situations to enable her to move forwards again. Now, because we're doing these workshops through video, it's very difficult to get interaction with you, obviously. So it will be great now if you could just press the pause button for a moment and have a think about your chimp, your human, and your computer. And maybe just write down 3 or 4 key points that you've taken from that first bit of delivery. But also try and think of situations where your chimp may have hijacked situations, where your chimps maybe caused you to behave in a way that you didn't want to behave, and when, if you could have managed your chimp in a better way, you may have got a better result. So I hope you found that bit of reflection time useful. As we mentioned before, your chimp is neither your friend nor your foe. It's really learning to work together and to manage your chimp effectively. Now, before we chat about that, I'd just like to tell you about something that happened to me that really showed me how my chimp, human, and computer work together to both be really helpful, but sometimes to be a bit of a pain in the butt. So I'd like to tell you about a time when I was involved in a row across the Irish Sea. It's an annual race called the Celtic Challenge, and people row in these kind of boats, the Celtic rowing boats, and they row from Ireland over to Wales. Now, the way it works is you have 2 teams of 5 people, and one team will be on a support boat. The boat we had wasn't as fancy as this, but it was the only photo I could find. And then one team is rowing in the rowing boat. And then there's a rib that transports one team from the support boat onto the rib and then over to the rowing boat. The team that are rowing then get out of the rowing boat and into the rib. The team that are in the rib get out of the rib and into the rowing boat. And then the rib brings back the resting team to the support boat so that they have then a 2-hour break before they get ready to row again. Now, the year we did the Irish Sea, it was big seas, it was fairly stormy, and it was very unpredictable weather. So to get onto the rib, we had to climb down some stairs at the back of the support boat and step into the rib. Now, because of the injury I've got to my leg, I struggled to push off and step across into the rib. And just as I was about to make that move, a big wave came, pushed the rib away from the support boat, and as I went to step onto the rib, I stepped straight into the sea instead. Now, because of the conditions, I was in danger of being washed away. But somehow I got a hand out of the water and I grabbed hold of this line around the edge of the rib, and somehow I managed to pull myself back into the boat. Now, I would never normally have the strength to do that. That was my chimp keeping me alive. That was my chimp giving me the adrenaline and the strength to pull myself back into the rib. And I was really grateful for my chimp doing the job so well. But what happened then was that I'd got an experience that had been put in my computer. So the next time I then came to do a transfer from the rib into the support boat, my chimp looked into my computer. There was evidence there to say that this was dangerous, that it was a threat. So my chimp started shouting very, very loudly, telling me not to do it because it was dangerous. So I froze. I couldn't step onto the ladder to climb back into the support boat. So my teammates all helped me. I had someone behind me to give me a little push. I had someone on the steps to try and pull me in. We put things in place to make sure it was safe. Doing that enabled me to make the transfer and I got safely into the boat. So I'd also put in my computer a better experience. But the first experience is still there. So the next time when I came to transfer from the support boat into the rib, my chimp did the same thing. My chimp looked into my computer. First thing was danger, and danger is going to override everything. So he shouted very, very loudly at me to stop and not do it. So I then had to work with my chimp and manage the situation. So I was able to press the pause button, give my human brain time to step in and look for the logical, rational information. That information was, we'd now got support in place to help me. My teammates were there to support me and to make sure I didn't fall back in the water. So thanks for your concern, Chimp. You're doing a great job in trying to keep me safe. But actually, this time we're okay. But every time I went to make that transfer, I had to go through that process. I had to manage my chimp because my chimp was trying to do an incredibly good job of keeping me safe. So we keep talking about managing your chimp. How do we do that? So there are 4 main ways to manage your chimp. The first one, we've mentioned it a few times already, is to press the pause button. So if you feel your chimp starting to hijack things, you press the pause button and give your human brain time to step in. Who's ever got into an argument and said things they didn't mean to say? But in the heat of the argument, you get emotional, you get upset, and you really say things that just come out without thinking about it. That's your chimp hijacking the situation. Because how many times when we've calmed down do we actually wonder why we'd even got upset in the first place? So recognising when your chimp is hijacking things and pressing the pause button, same as Georgia had to do sat outside that cave, that's a great way of learning to manage your chimp behaviour. Another way is to exercise your chimp. One thing that I often do when I'm feeling down or upset or cross or angry or frustrated is I'll train. And actually what I'm doing there is I'm exercising my chimp. Yesterday, I was feeling really miserable, really fed up with life. And I wanted to say, stuff training, I'm not going to do it. But actually I know that that is my chimp hijacking things. I'm feeling emotional, I'm feeling irrational. By getting on the bike, beasting out a session, it brings me back into human thinking, I rationalise things, and I immediately start to feel better. Now, it doesn't just have to be around physical exercise. It's whatever works for you to exercise your chimp. It might be listening to music, it might be going for a walk, it might be reading a book. It's anything that you need to do to express your chimp, to allow your chimp to actually have a bit of a run and a kick of his heels and a yap at people's feet, but to exercise that frustration and emotional and bring you back into human thinking. An incredibly important one for me is to acknowledge your chimp. When your chimp's trying to do a good job, your chimp wants to keep you safe. So it wants you to be aware of danger. Go back to Georgia, sat outside that cave. Her chimp has evidence that that unattended bag could be dangerous. If she tried to ignore it, her chimp's just going to shout louder and louder because her chimp is convinced that that bag means danger. But by actually acknowledging her chimp, by saying, thank you. Thank you for making me aware. I can now check out the threat. Now I've checked it out, I know it's safe. I know it's okay. So thanks for doing such a great job, but actually in this situation, I'm safe. George's chimp was then able to rest easy, go back in his cave and sit down and have a banana. And finally, one that personally I think is important, but Steve Peters doesn't actually talk about this, but that is to support your chimp. I did a lot of work with one young person who had real trouble managing her anxiety. And what she realised was that her anxiety was actually her chimp. And once her chimp started hijacking things, it was impossible for her to think logically and rationally. So what she put in place was a support package for her chimp, coping strategies, so that as soon as her chimp started to feel anxious, she would follow these processes to enable her to manage the situation. So she would write a letter to her chimp. She had a song that she listened to that was a trigger to calm down. She had a lavender scent that was her trigger for her chimp to calm down. She also had a series of questions. What are you concerned about, chimp? Is that really true? Is that really a threat to us? What can I do to help you calm down? By having this process in place and supporting her chimp, whenever her chimp started to hijack things, she would get out a cue card, follow the process, and that enabled her to support her chimp and manage her anxiety. So again, I'm going to ask you to press the pause button and just reflect on what we've just talked about in ways to manage your chimp. Think about times that your chimps maybe hijacked situations and caused you to behave in a way you maybe wish you hadn't. Think of how you could have managed that situation differently. What ways of managing your chimp would have worked better? And what might work in the future for you? If you know you get into arguments with your parent or your partner or your daughter or son, if you know something pushes your buttons, try and think about what might work to help you manage those situations in the future. So I hope there were some useful reflections there again. Now for the final section of this workshop, I'd like to tell you another story. The other night I was having a discussion with my partner. I'd got quite chimpy and emotional, and I'd stopped thinking rationally. He was still very much in human mode, and he recognised that I was getting pretty irrational. So he said, let's leave it for tonight and let's talk about it in the morning. Now when I woke up in the morning, my chimp had calmed down and I was back in human mode, and we had a very good rational discussion and sorted out the problem we had very quickly and very amicably. So where's the best place to be when we're having conversations? What's the best part of your brain to be using when you're having conversations, whether that be with your work colleague, your partner, or your kids, or friends, anyone? Now, if we're in chimp to chimp, if both people are in chimp mode, is that going to get you a good result? Absolutely not. I take you back to the argument with my partner. If he'd gone into chimp mode too, that probably would have turned into a mighty argument that would have ended up in tears and probably sleeping in separate rooms. If we're in chimp to human mode, we stand a better chance of getting a good result. But actually, to take you back to the argument with my partner, I was never going to think rationally. I was never going to see the rational side of the discussion because I was still in chimp mode. So actually, no, we weren't going to get a good outcome then. The best place to get a good outcome from any conversation you're having is when you're in human to human mode. So what I would say is be aware. If you recognise that when you're getting into discussions that one or both of you are being hijacked by your chimp and are operating with the chimp part of your brain, try and step away. Step away, calm down, allow you both to get into human thinking, and the chances are you'll get a much better outcome from the conversation. So finally, to summarise what we've gone over today, there are 3 parts to your brain. Your chimp, which is all about survival. Your human, which is your logical, rational thinking. And your computer, which stores all your past experiences and learnt behaviours. The key is to manage your chimp effectively. And that can be done in 4 ways. By pressing the pause button, by acknowledging your chimp, exercising your chimp, or supporting your chimp. And think about what part of your brain is in charge when you're having conversations. If you're in chimp to chimp mode with other people, or chimp to human mode with other people, best to step away. When you're in human to human mode, that's when the best conversations with the best outcomes will happen. But most importantly, be aware. Now you know about the chimp paradox. Now hopefully you understand a little bit more about how the brain works. Be aware which part of your brain is running the show. Now, just because you've listened to this workshop doesn't mean you're going to walk away and never be hijacked by your chimp again. Personally, it took me a long time. I made many mistakes when my chimp still hijacked situations and took control. But what I was able to do was recognise that afterwards. I'd look at arguments I'd had, times when I got emotional, and once I'd calmed down, I was able to go, that was my chimp. If I'd just pressed the pause button, I could have handled that so much better. So be aware. That's the first step. The more you practice it, the more aware you become, the better you'll become at recognising which part of your brain is in charge and learning how to manage your chimp and work together to get a great, healthy relationship. So again, I'd really encourage you to just stop and reflect for a few moments at the end of this workshop and maybe just jot down a few things. What are you going to try and stop doing that hasn't really been working for you in the past? And what are you going to start doing? What can you do differently moving forwards from this point to help manage your chimp and create a healthy working relationship with that chimp? Notice what you notice. This is the fun bit. You've got a great tool now that you can apply to life, and you'll suddenly start seeing chimp behaviour not just from yourself but from other people too. The more aware you become, the better you'll get at building that relationship with your chimp.